Well, good morning. The announcement that Scott was going to make that I did not give him the announcement to make is this. My beautiful, lovely daughter Hillary is graduating from high school this year, or I'm not sure if she has or not. We didn't have a deal for it yet, but we are. They're doing the ceremony on this Saturday, and the whole church is invited to my house Sunday afternoon for a celebration. Now, that being said, and that is on the 26th from 5 to 7 at my house, 409 Van Buren Court in Wentzville. All of that is in the bulletin. And RSVP to my wife so she knows how many hot dogs to get. But that is, and I understand there's not a lot of people are comfortable getting out. It will be a BYOM, bring your own mask. And so anyway, if you want to come and celebrate that, we're going to be celebrating, even if it's just me and Hillary playing cornhole in the backyard. Which she won't like that because I'm way better than her. All right, if you have your Bibles, I was going to read Genesis 3, 1 through 5 again this week. It was our text from last week. But I just want to kind of summarize that instead because, but I do want to leave that up there so you can read it if you would like. Man, this thing is driving me nuts today. I'm sorry. Let me get, okay. The whole concept of the scripture reading is to shed light on the fact that when it comes to our interaction with Satan, when it comes to our interaction with our doubts and our fears, when it comes to all of those things, we are severely outgunned. Regardless of what we think, regardless of what we want to think, when it comes to our fight against spiritual evil, when it comes to our fight against the enemy of our souls, we don't stand a chance. So we need to rely on God more than anything. So this morning I want to just remind us that so often what we think in our mind is a good thing to do or say typically isn't. I mean, I'm sure that Eve thought that her arguing with the serpent or her defending God, I bet she felt like, boy, she was just on the right side of history or on the right side of whatever that she was thinking, but it didn't work out so great for her, did it? Or any of us for that matter. So I want to reiterate something that my brother, and I'll tell you this, I've known Charlie for 20 some odd years, a long time. And I appreciate his passion, and I've never heard him raise his voice one time, ever. And this morning it was exciting to see my brother passionate about what's going on because I too share his passion. And I was talking to some friends this week, and I want to, and this right here, as I talk to us online and here, this right here, what you're witnessing, could be the beginning of the end of my second term here at O'Fallon. I'm just going to say that right now. Because I believe with all of my heart, one of the most dangerous things on this planet is someone over 60 with a Facebook account. A lot of times, what we feel like we need to say, we don't need to say. We don't. I want to use this as an opportunity to say this right here. The issues that we are dealing with in this country that have to do with racial inequality and racism have nothing to do with who grew up harder. I want to say that one more time. Has nothing to do with who picked what, who worked on a farm, who didn't, who grew up in the inner city, and who had it worse. It ain't about that. It's not about who grew up the poorest Everybody was poor. Let's just say everybody grew up poor. We all did. I was on a farm. You were on a farm. You were in the inner city. Everybody was poor. It's not about that. Can we stop thinking it's about who had it rougher growing up? Because it's not. What we're talking about is the very real fact that there is a difference when I walk into a store and people look at me versus when my brother Steve goes into a store and people look at him. There is a difference. It's not my fault. It's not Tim's fault. It's not Steve's fault. But there's a difference. And we have to be about changing that. We have to be about the business of loving each other so recklessly, so passionately, so publicly, so openly, so that everyone out there sees there's something different about those people. There's something different about those people. And they will either flee from us or they will join us. So let's just get it one thing straight right now. We're not talking about who had the most opportunities growing up, who had the best opportunity for a scholarship, who should have went here, who should have. We're talking about the fact that we live in a society that can't get it straight, that all men and women were created by God equally. We're all sinners saved by God's grace. And until we understand that, church, it's not a competition. It is not a competition. It's not a competition who's the worst off, who's the best off, any of that. I get it. All lives matter. But right now, we have to focus on the fact that some of our brothers and sisters are treated differently. And that has to end. That has to end. And as for me and my house, we will post nothing but what is helpful. We will post nothing but what is encouraging to us all, that's lifting up. We will post nothing but that points our attention to God. Not my plight, not your plight. We will post what only draws attention to God. I want to say this as well. What we do now, whether it's COVID or racism or anything, what we do now, and I said this 5 months ago, speaks volumes of who we truly are. I want to say this. What if God is up to something on earth and we are completely unaware? Bear with me here. I know we know everything. I know that. I get it. I know we've all graduated from Facebook Community College. And we've been to Google Medical School, and we just know everything. Me included. I'm as prideful as it gets. What if God's up to something that we're completely... We think God's altering our circumstances of our lives, but still pointing us generally in the same direction. What if circumstances have nothing to do with what God's trying to do in our lives? What if God's not trying to change, to monkey with our circumstances so that we'll change direction? What if God is trying to fundamentally change what we believe the meaning of our own lives are? What if we're sitting over here, we're playing checkers and God's playing 3D chess? Just think about that for just a second. If it's even possible for God to be further along than we are. Have we even been paying attention? Because as I look around at churches and I look around at when I contemplate myself and because let me tell you something, I take it very seriously getting up here every day and telling us what God is saying. That's not something I just, I'll just get up and do it today. I labor and pray and worry and fret and rewrite and no, and I can't say that and And then I know that I need to stop fighting God when I go days without sleep, because God says, I will not give you rest. So I blame God for my insomnia because I am not listening, and he's saying, okay, well, then you'll get tired enough, and then you'll listen, and I'll let you sleep. But as I look around, I think, what makes us any different? What makes us any different than some primitive tribe somewhere dancing around a fire, banging on stretched animal skins over wooden circles and shaking skulls filled with pebbles as we imagine some otherly, capricious, unseen, imagined deity? I mean, because there will come a time when we're primitive. Generations from now, we'll look back on us and look at those. Look at those guys. Man, they're just painting their faces and dancing around and making a bunch of noise at some god that they obviously made up in their heads. Because God shows up in times like this, when we're all dancing around the fire, chanting and waving and all those things. But what kills me is that when we leave here, a nation, one nation under God, ceases to look anything like Jesus. I'm glad Charlie brought some good news this morning, because my heart has been heavy. Because we can write it on our money, we can write it on our cop cars, we can argue about it all day long. But there is one thing that we trust, and it's me. That's it. In me I trust. In my point of view, in my opinion, in my thoughts, in my desires, in my wants, in my wishes, in me I trust. See, what we believe about God, it doesn't show up in how we dance around the fire. What we believe about God shows up in how you act. Shows up in what you do. See, we believe that God is untrustworthy, so we take matters into our own hands. That's the story of the garden right there. We believe God to not be trustworthy. Well, and not completely, but if there's 1 ounce, 1 grain of sand of distrust, then let me tell you something. We are masters at hedging our bets. Well, we'll still trust you, sort of, but we'll take matters into our own hands. And I'm convinced that we have learned very little from Jesus in the last 2,000 years. Because you can see the way that we struggle with a pandemic. You can see the way that we treat one another. We still believe that our biggest issue is death being the worst thing that can happen to us. Until we understand that dying is not the worst thing that can happen to us, we will still take matters into our own hands. We will still be the most worrisome, the most fretful, the most selfish, the most individualized people ever to be, because we're under the delusion that death is to be avoided at all costs. And I would rather kill than face my own mortality. And we've been singing 10,000 angels for generations. I mean, let's just think about what we sing. And this week I'll tell you this, there's certain things about this situation that I like. I like the fact that I get to pick out the songs because I have the library right now. As soon as the other guys get a hold of the library, the songs will be a whole lot different. But I like that I get to pick them out and that I get to sing them all week. And I've been singing that Revelation song, and Scott was like, well, I don't really know that. I was like, are you kidding me? I mean, I know that song by heart. Well, I've been singing it all week. He hasn't. But as I sung that this week, all week in the car, all week in the office, all week, there's one phrase that just jumped out at me. I will adore you. And I thought, will we? I mean, because we can sing it all day long. But one of the things that my good friend John Earnhardt used to say to me is that, I'd be trash talking him on the basketball court, and he would say, stop singing it, start bringing it. That surprises you, doesn't it, Tim, that I will talk trash on the basketball court? I know. Stop singing it. And I think God's telling us that. Stop singing it. Start bringing it. Last week we got started on, and that's what God's been keeping me up at night, thinking about and worrying about and praying over. And we've got to do better. As a church, as a nation, we've got to do better. And God died so that we can do better. Jesus came and lived and modeled for us and went to the cross so that we could do better. So that we could be better. And we want to be in control for fear of not being in control. And we talked about that. And so I got you all the way to 1 Kings 6, 15 through 18 last week. And we talked about fear. We talked about Elisha and his armor bearer or his messenger, his servant. And they were afraid because when they came out in the morning, one morning, their enemies were completely surrounding them. And so Elisha prayed that prayer that I love to quote to, and I quote it to my kids all the time. God, open their eyes so that they can see what I can see. Open his eyes so that he can see what I can see, because the thing that I've realized over all of my years of ministry is that those who live in God's perpetual rest, those who experience the most peace and the most joy in the face of ridiculous circumstances, those people that overcome are the ones that can see what no one else can see. Because God has opened their eyes. Many people can see a lot of things, but they're looking through eyes opened by Satan in the garden, not by God on the mountain. He said, God, please open his eyes so that he can see what I can see. And his eyes were opened, and he saw the mountains and the hills surrounding Elisha filled with chariots of fire, horses, God's deliverance coming to rescue them. And I'm challenged by this passage because I think a lot of times we are looking for deliverance from our circumstances. We're looking for rescue, what scares us, in so many places other than in the face of God. And I was reminded of a song, looking for love in all the wrong places. And I think a lot of times we as Christians, we as people, we as citizens of God's kingdom, we're looking for safety. We're looking for peace. We're looking for joy. We are looking for rescue from what scares us in all the wrong places. I mean, we're looking for rescue in science and in government and in substance and experience, when all along God is saying, I am here, able to be trusted. I will save you from everything that scares you. And I'm afraid that we're still under the same misconception as the disciples in the boat with Jesus during that storm on the Sea of Galilee in Matthew chapter 8. Remember when they're all there and Jesus is asleep and they wake him up and we're all going to die and they said to Jesus, I love this. I never heard these words until the last couple of weeks as I really thought about and prayed over this sermon. But when the disciples said to Jesus, look it up in Matthew chapter 8, they said, don't you care that we're going to die? What do you think Jesus said to them? See, Griff, I thought that for a long time. Of course I do. Of course I care. But what if maybe, just think about this different. What if Jesus, don't you care that we're going to die? And what if Jesus says, no, I don't. I really don't care that you're going to die. Because that's not the worst thing that can ever happen to you. I'm not so worried about your death right now. I'm worried that you might stay alive. I'm worried that you might still represent me the way that you have currently been, and that's worse than you dying. I mean, have you ever read in Malachi where God says, that you would just close the doors of your temple so that no one else can come in and be infected by your hapless, worthless worship to me? Do you think maybe for 1 second, as we all argue and debate and just gripe and moan about churches being shut down, what if God is saying, if you won't close those doors, I will? I'm not saying that's what God's up to. But I'm telling you that we need to be a people worthy of the gospel, worthy of worshiping Him. Over and over in the New Testament, Paul tells people, be worthy of the calling. Be worthy of the gospel. Be worthy of what has been done on your behalf. Be the kind of people that are persecutable. I'm afraid that we're under the same delusion, the misconception that what they were worried about. But nevertheless, we find ourselves in that situation. And so many times we're too quick to look for deliverance from people who have no ability to deliver. So many times we're asking for directions from people who are just as equally lost as we are. I mean, here's a survival tip for you. And this will, Kyle can relate to this because he and I have been, as you might recall, he and I have been hiking together in bear-infested woods during Winterfest. But if there was a pack of bears on the trail and you and I are hiking, don't hide behind me. I mean, seriously, don't hide behind me. Not because I might outrun you, but that's a very good possibility. Because I don't have to be faster than the bear, Kyle. Remember that. I just got to be faster than you. But you know what happens when you hide behind me, when we're being attacked by lions? When they get done eating me, you're next. And that's going to happen. But that is our mentality. Is we hide behind things. We go for rescue to others who are just 5 minutes further from drowning than we are. God is saying, I'm trying to open your eyes so that you can see what I can see. We need to understand that so often other people are no protection from what frightens you. You see, when we're fearful, when we're worried, we look to our own understanding, we rely on our own strength, and we depend on other people. But what God shows us here in 2 Kings 6 is that only God can truly deliver. And it typically looks a whole lot different than we think it does. Because when we see our enemy before us, when we see sin, when we see fallenness, when we see the armies of darkness surrounding us, we think of strike out and call upon God to send an army of angels to defeat them and to kill them and all those things. Just like they said, just like here in 2 Kings 6, they thought, okay, the Arameans are here and God's we've got them surrounded and God's going to show up. So I can't wait for the carnage and the bloodshed. And God strikes them blind and He tells His people, set up a banquet for them. Because God delivers differently than we deliver. You see, because we believe the only way to fight evil is with more powerful evil. See, if you say that your life matters, then I've got to tell you how much mine does too. Because that's all we know how to do. Is fight evil with more and finer sounding evil. But you know what God calls us to do? He calls us to fight evil with righteousness. He calls us to fight against what we are afraid of with less evil and more righteousness. So that we can then live in a world that we don't have to declare that life matters. We just get to enjoy it together. So why don't we fight evil as it shows up in our lives, as it shows up against us, as it scares us literally to death, with a surrender to God's righteousness, with an absolute, unequivocal surrender to God's righteousness. You see, God blinded the enemy of His people. And when armies are blinded, they become helpless. And what we find is that when we involve God, when we involve God fighting against the evil in our lives and in this world, when we involve God, the enemy is way less fierce. And we're able to see the threats for what they truly are, not what we have fearfully empowered them to be. You see, like I mentioned last week, we are only able to overcome enemies for a season. But God is able to overcome our enemies for a lifetime. In verse 23, we see that the Arameans had been against the Israelites for generations. But it was only when God brought about the victory that they were at peace. So I'll ask you the same question I asked you last week. What do you want God to overcome in your life forever? What scares you today that you are willing to turn over to God and be at peace with in an instant that lasts the rest of your life? What is it? A particular sin? Is it a sin that you feel like that if you continue to control that it empowers you somehow, that it makes you feel in some kind of a carnal way better about yourself, or at least it hides a greater pain? Is there a sin that you are using to avoid being completely controlled by God? Is there a relationship? Is there another person? Is there another group of people? Is there something in your self-esteem that causes you to lash out and to compete with everyone else, that if you will just surrender to God and stop trying to be something that you're not and allow God to build you up in His image, you realize that surrendering, being a servant, is truly being elevated. What can you surrender, not surrender to, but surrender to God and be free from for the rest of your life? May the God of all mercy and justice shine His face upon you. May this week be a week of rest. I will challenge you to observe more than you speak. I will challenge you to love more than you doubt. And in all things, may we be more like Jesus this week than we ever have been. And can we prove to future generations that the God we serve is not a myth, not a construct of our fallen imaginations. He's real enough to change not only what we say, but what we do. Would you join me as together we stand and Scott leads us in our closing song?